Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our brand tracking webinar from ActXN. Just to take you through this sort of session, let me introduce myself first of all. My name is Alistair Johnson. I'm a research director at ActXM, and I lead our brand tracking sort of offer within the organization. My history is I've got 30 plus years as a market researcher, 10 years in the UK and 20 plus years in Australia. Been director of a number of agencies over the course of the years and actually ran my own agency for about 12 years before joining ActXM a couple of years ago to head up our research offer and do a bunch of other things within the organization. What we're going to do today is we're going to take you through sort of brand tracking from an ActXM perspective. And we've got kind of three broad areas that I really want to talk to you about. Firstly, I'd like to share with you just some thoughts on why brand tracking is important. This is kind of supported by, kind of a whole bunch of experience I've accrued over the years, and also just from my own sort of personal experiences that I've had running projects for a host of different organizations on both sides of the world to sort of share learnings I've seen, and also just general anecdotes and sort of things I've learned from the broader market research world over time. We'll also share with you just how ActXM approaches market research and brand tracking specifically. A lot of stuff I might be talking about in terms of how we approach market research and brand tracking may seem very straightforward, but trust me, I've learned over the years that even some of the more basic considerations that we have in brand tracking can often be overlooked. So let me share with you some best practice thoughts and ideas about how brand tracking can best be organized. And finally, we'll finish up with something that's a bit grandly titled The Future of Brand Tracking, which is kind of only like a couple of thoughts about one particular thing that ActXM and Qualtrics allow you to do with your brand tracking data. But throughout the course of the presentation as well, I also talk to innovations and things I'm seeing in the broader brand tracking world that I think is adding value to what clients can get out of brand tracking and make sure that, it's the best outcome for everyone involved. So that's the kind of broad structure I hope to take you through today. So let's kind of start off a little bit with why is sort of brand measurement or brand tracking important? Now, I guess I'd ask you, I'm not sure any of you actually have, but if you actually Google things like why do business fails, you see a whole bunch of things uniformly being provided to you. You get things like cash flow and finding the right people, which obviously are pretty significant things and clearly can lead to business failure. But more pertinently for this discussion, you also see kind of four broad areas being mentioned routinely, and it doesn't matter if you search Forbes or Business Insider or general web forums, you typically find causes of business failure include a lack of market research, poor marketing, failure to adapt to change and changing circumstances, and a failure to keep abreast of the competition. Now, these four latter challenges are all things that if you design a brand tracking program effectively and properly, you can certainly dissuade and prevent happening. You can get great insights, you can understand your competitive mindset. And what I'm trying to do is taking you through this presentation and kind of show you the thought processes we have to help you sort of deliver to these needs and stave off these potential risks. So let's start off. 5 fundamental reasons to believe in brand research. Now, I'm not going to really go through all these points in individual sort of details. Sort of firstly, I've got different slides for each point and I'll cover the detail in them now. But the key point is these are reasons to believe that if you get this right, this will make sure that you get sort of your less chance of business failure. And really, the reasons businesses tend to struggle or not do as well as they should is that they have poor information and consequently they make poor sort of decisions on the back of that. So good research should always be about giving the right insights to help you reduce risk and make better decisions. It's also worth saying that although I think tracking research is very important and very powerful, like all research sources, they don't exist in a silo. And by that, I mean, having a great brand tracking program in place is fantastic, but it's even more fantastic if you augment it with other research sources, ad hoc call research, ad hoc quant research, tapping into your sales team, the people within your organization who have their own knowledge of your own markets and your own circumstances. If you sort of augment and align these different information sources, then they're even more powerful. You spot the themes, you spot the things you need to react to, and from therefore you make much better decisions as a business. So yes, brand tracking is fantastic, but it's even more fantastic if you align it with other information sources. And it's also just worth saying, and our first anecdote of the day today is it's even the best research can only take you so far. You need leadership and you need a business mindset to react to that. And an example I always like to talk about in this regard is if you think about Kodak, the sort of camera, film, and photography company that went out of business about 15, 20 years ago. A lot of people feel that the reason Kodak went under was that it didn't actually see digital photography coming. Now, actually, nothing could be further from the truth. Kodak was one of these organizations that did research brilliantly. They had a fantastic research program in place. They knew all about digital photography. They even built some of the earliest, best digital camera prototypes that existed in the market. The problem and the reason why Kodak failed is, in spite of having all this great information, the leadership of the organization failed to take it seriously and thought it was too difficult and not worthwhile reacting to. That caused the company demise. And it just kind of shows you that even if you've got the best research and the best processes in place, you still need that mindset in your organization to do positive things with it. So let's move on and talk about these 5 fundamental sort of things. And first of all, got to tell you, market research and brand tracking, it's about more than just the metrics themselves. Let's take a look at the metrics. Let's take 3 very basic metrics. You have awareness, consideration, and uptake. Now, these are the fundamental essence of what we call the brand funnel, which you've probably heard about before. You start wide with awareness and you narrow into consideration, and then you narrow further into uptake. By themselves, they are fantastic measures. For example, if people don't know about you, well, they can't think about you and they certainly can't buy your products. If people aren't considering you, well, that tells you that you've got to think a little bit harder about what your message and proposition are to get yourself to be sold to other people. And if people aren't uptaking your product, well, there's your challenge. If you're not selling, it's very hard to make profits and it's very difficult to be viable as an organization or as a business. So very powerful reasons in isolation that you must be monitoring over the course of time. Where powerful brand tracking really comes into its own, though, is when you start looking at the interrelation between these individual sort of attributes. And then you really get a whole new layer of learning and much more sort of value from any market research or brand tracking you undertake. Take it, for example, the scenario that you have high awareness, but you've got low consideration. That can tell a marketeer that your marketing and media selection is probably pretty good. You're getting the message out, people know about you, your channel selection is probably good. But it would suggest that the low consideration would suggest that maybe it's something wrong with your proposition or your messaging. And it doesn't matter how effective your marketing channels are and to get you noticed, if you haven't got the right message to say or resonate with people, you've got to question what's the point of even doing that. Let's move on to a second consideration. You might be a brand where you have high consideration but low uptake. Well, that would suggest to me that, there's probably, with terms of your messaging and your proposition, it's probably okay. There's not too much to worry about there. But it makes me think there has to be a problem somewhere else. Could there be an issue with your sales channel? How are you taking your product to market? Could there be an issue with your price? Or could it just be that your competitors are doing a better job and are promoting you in some ways? Now, this consideration to uptake sort of ratio was really important and really came to the fore when online sort of sales came around. There are a lot of very good products and brands, but were too slow of getting a digital proposition for the product. As a consequence, they fell behind until they started to introduce those digital sales channels moving forward. Now, AI is the current fad of the day, phenomenon of the day, a very powerful tool, and we'll talk a lot about that during the course of this presentation. But who's not to say that the same scenario won't exist? Those brands that fail to build AI into their propositions moving forward might struggle in the consideration set. Even though other elements of the products are perfectly viable and acceptable to people, that missing element might just cause people to fall off the sort of the purchase set moving forward. Just my own theory there, but final thing might be considering brands who might have low awareness but high consideration and uptake. That's actually quite a great scenario to be in because that's the time you can actually go and knock on your CFO's door or the chief executive's door and say, hey, I need a bit more money for marketing. And this is a really common scenario for a lot of younger businesses and a lot of startup organizations. So actually they have a great idea, they have a proposition, but they're not backing it up enough in terms of spend to get sort of increasing their sales and increasing their presence in the market. So metrics in isolation are fantastic. Metrics in relation to each other, when you start to look at the differences and correlations, can tell you so much more. Another real benefit of brand tracking is it keeps you aligned with your customers and your marketplace. Now, that may be fairly obvious to you, but the point about brand tracking I think is really important to take out is it is an impartial point of view for your brand, and it's actually something that is aligned to you. And to neglect it and not have that ready information tailored to your own brand and your own needs is a major shortfall for a lot of businesses. Why wouldn't you want that ability to understand what your customers and category drivers think? Now, this is especially important if you think of just how global the world has become. As someone who's the wrong side of 50, I can kind of compare my 14-year-old self to my son, who's 14 as well. And I look at the differences in the world in terms of My frame of reference was a small village in the north of Scotland. You had four TV channels, social media, mobile phones hadn't really been thought of or invented in any real basis. You look at his modern world when he's a global citizen, he's comparing himself with millions rather than thousands of people, and he's so much more access. Well, it's exactly the same scenario when you think about your own company, your own customers, and your own brands. We're comparing ourselves to a much wider set, and it's really important to have a mechanism in place that really allows you to deliver to three core needs. The first thing is making sure you don't overlook the obvious. Now, that may be an obvious point, but it's again, if you look through business history, there's no shortage of organizations that fail to actually see the obvious happening to them. I saw recently an article that Nokia is reissuing its mobile phones, these small little phones. And I know guys who actually did Nokia research historically. And for some reason, Nokia chose to ignore that their main competitors were introducing smartphones with big screens and were focusing everything on web capabilities. Now, to us, we can barely imagine a smartphone without web connectivity and a big screen, but companies do overlook it. So having a mechanism in place that allows you to really make sure you can see what's happening around you is absolutely vital. It's also important to get a mechanism in that allows you to predict the next big thing. And again, two very obvious examples of this might be if you look at the food industry. Anyone with a brand tracker over time looking at behaviors and needs from food products can't have failed to have noticed over time the importance of organic, the importance of provenance, the importance of dietary needs such as gluten. Having a brand tracker in place that allows you to see these things, you can start to see when they emerge, you can start to see when they grow, and it forewarns an organization to say, okay, this is growing, there's energy behind this, what can we do about it to grow? Sustainability is another really obvious example of this, where so many companies now need a sustainable proposition to deliver to the needs of the market. And if you've got a tracker in place, you can really forewarn yourself with a sort of pieces of information that can help you respond to a changing world. And perhaps my sort of favorite example is this is brand trackers can also help you spot the little things that can make a really big difference. And the one that always makes me giggle about this is thinking about the automotive industry and the importance of cup holders. Now, I'm sure in the automotive industry, there's lots of people in white coats who stand in wind tunnels who are looking at designing the most efficient aerodynamic chassis. And you can also have the engineers looking at the engines, thinking about the torque ratio, thinking about the greenness of the individual engine. But about 15 years ago, cup holders were the fourth most important things in deciding what new car to buy. So people might be walking into the garage showroom and saying, wow, that's a nice looking car. Geez, that can go fast. But hey, what's a coffee cup holder like? Again, research, tapping into your customers, you can start to identify these things earlier on and see when they become big enough and something that you have to react on. The next really important benefit of brand tracking and something you really need to think about is the competitive context. We don't exist in a silo, that's pretty clear, and actually it's frowned upon. Monopolies and oligopolies are not seen to be generally good things. We're all kind of influenced by what our competitors do, and having a good understanding of your competitive set is a really vital way to be. In the most extreme case, I remember working for an organization that actually did a lot of research, but when it came to their innovation, they solely based their innovation function on what their main competitor, the number two in the market, did. They basically looked at them as they introduced new products. They measured how their new products went. That was a competitor's products they measured. They sort of tested it with consumers and they sort of bought copies of it. They ripped them apart and looked at the technology behind it. But they didn't actually take the risk of developing their own products. They merely stood back and looked at the number two and decided, right, if this survived for a period of time and hit certain criteria, we'll build our own version. Now, this is a hugely successful company, but a hugely successful company who realized that we don't want to take the risk of developing our own products necessarily. We understand how important our competitors are to us, and therefore we will base major strategic decisions on what our competitors' performance. They were big enough and strong enough to not need to be first in the market, but they justified it, and they're a fantastic brand. I won't name them out of potentially embarrassing them for that little trade secret, but they're a fantastically successful brand who do incredibly well. If you want another reason why you should really pay attention to your competitors, I want to perhaps paint the scenario that imagine you're a situation of your company and your uptake or sales have increased by 10%. Now, even with this high inflation world we live in, a 10% increase in sales is probably something most brands would be really pleased about. Good performances, you might be thinking about your bonuses, you might be thinking of how you hit your targets. But what if your brand tracker tells you that your key competitors' sales have grown by 50%? Suddenly, it's a different scenario. 10% could be good, but 50% is an awful lot better. You've got to keep an eye on what's going on around you, and brand trackers are a great way of making sure you're not only keeping an eye on your marketplace as a whole, but you can also keep an eye on your competitive set to make sure that you're optimizing your performance. Another really important benefit of a brand tracker is just think about how much money is spent in advertising and media in Australia or across the world. By that, I mean TV advertising, creative development, the whole process. I actually tried to find a figure in advance of this this webinar and actually couldn't get an exact number, which always makes me think, geez, it must be pretty high if we can't even find that exact number. The reality is most companies spend an awful lot of their money on marketing and advertising. And I guess the challenge would be, why wouldn't you want an independent mechanism? And by that, I mean a mechanism that's geared towards you to assess the efficacy. I'm sure your financial teams would be important, but also as marketeers, why wouldn't you want a way of just assessing what you can do? Three ways we typically use brand tracking to sort of align ourselves to marketing performance and understand our marketing performance better is, first of all, you can use brand tracking to understand the return on investment on individual media. You can actually feed in spend data and understand how much you spend on different media channels. And you can pair that to individual performance of individual things such as TV advertising, radio advertising, digital, whatever it might be. That basic level of understanding can give fairly clear guidance and say, so well, something you're spending 80% of your marketing resources in one particular channel, but it's only giving you 10% of your awareness. Maybe you want to think, is that balance right? Or is this something you can change? It is worth saying that this is when research is always good in alignment with other sources. Using Brand Tracker to assess marketing performance is often part of the story. There are more advanced metrics that can be in place to measure, but as a high level read of how your business is performing and how your marketing channel is going, brand tracking can be fantastic to help you just understand how individual media performs. Another way of using a brand tracker to understand your marketing is actually aligning the channel and reach and recall to the actual messages that you're trying to build. And it surprises me that more and more companies don't do this. We often try and spend money on building sort of brand essence to ourselves. We want to be seen as a value proposition. We want to be seen as innovative. We want to be seen as strong in a particular area. Aligning the recall of individual channels against people who recall individual messages is a very powerful way, not just of understanding the high level impact of these media channels, but also the link between these media channels and the messages you want to get to market. Again, it's another layer of just appraising what are we actually doing and to what extent are these channels delivering to our core attributes. The final benefit of brand tracking for marketing performance is actually, we will spend a lot of money on research, perhaps pre-creative development, developing ideas, which we then turn into ads. But brand tracking's real strength is also getting current ads and assessing views on them. We can show ads on the research platforms, we can show images, we can play videos, we can play radio content, we can show digital reaches, whatever it might be. We can have a look at the recall. Do people remember seeing these things? What do people think about these things? Are they relevant? What message do they take out of them? Do they fit their brand? And from there, you gain the opportunity to, perhaps if you've got 5 ads in place, realize that maybe 3 or 4 are performing a little bit better, and you can change your ad rotation to really get the ads out there that work for you. And before you start saying, oh, but hang on, you need lots of different ads to get cut through, a lot of current research is saying that actually one effective ad campaign can run for much longer than the 2 or 3 years they're often given. Consumers aren't really that fussy in terms of what they see, and it's much better to have strong ads running for a longer term or a small number of great ads rather than a large number of some ads which are great and some are hit and miss. So you can really use brand tracking to inform your marketing mix. Another thing is, although it's brand tracking and we think market research and marketing and brand team, why on earth should your brand tracker be only for these audiences? I think like anything, research needs to sort of generate return on investment. It's got to prove its worth. And a great way of proving worth is making sure that it talks to other people in the organization. Other ways I've used brand tracking over the years to sort of cement its value to organizations. I've aligned with HR or people teams to kind of show the metrics and show the brand personalities we have. It's a great way to show to employees that, hey, people think we're doing this, people think we stand for this. We've got to work out ways of making this live and breathe and how we perform as employees on a day-to-day level. If you're looking to encourage investment or keep shareholders happy, what better than actually having metrics that show over time how you performed in particular areas, strengths, weaknesses, especially thinking about attracting investors. If you can show an upward curve and awareness and growth and consideration, then that's a very compelling way to encourage people to invest in you, especially if you're in the younger cycle of a business. It can also sort of show a credibility and a behavior or a commitment to an area. And again, I'm sort of very mindful of sustainability as this area. A lot of organizations are accused of jumping on the sustainable bandwagon. You know, what's your heritage? What's your pedigree? How dare you suddenly pretend you care about the environment? I'm very mindful of companies like Westpac who've got great sustainable sort of credentials. They have measured their link and their performance in sustainable areas for absolutely years. So when they move into green initiatives, they've got this proven pedigree of saying, no, listen, we're not just jumping on sustainability because it's today's story. We've been doing this for years. So fantastically important way to measure commitment, to measure things over time and really sort of create interest that way. And finally, something that I love to advocate as well is adding what we call a flex section onto a brand tracker as well. I actually had a conversation just yesterday with a client who we do brand tracking for, who's got a new product. So we've come up with the idea, let's tag the new product concept at the end of the current brand tracker. Let's see what people think about it. And then we can kind of align interest in the new concept about how people think about their existing product and they think about them as an organization as a whole, which gives us some real opportunities to see cross-selling opportunities. Something else I used to routinely do when I started out brand tracking was actually generate new news sections at the end. This could be as simple as if you're doing quarterly tracking, have 3 general interest questions tagged onto every wave of research. Do you agree with this? What do you feel about this? Then once your sort of survey is completed, you've got the ability to have topical views that you can share with customers, send them out emails, send them out newsletters, and just keep them involved and keep them understanding the dynamics of your business or the dynamics of your market. So lots of ways to use market research and brand tracking, certainly not just here for us marketeers or insights people.
Also, just a note, we are 23 minutes in.
Plenty, thank you. Okay, how do we approach brand tracking? So let's share with you a little bit about how we go about sort of designing brand tracking as a whole. When you get to traditional brand tracking, we've got a picture. It's supposed to be an ugly duckling, but I think it's actually quite cute. But traditionally, brand tracking has been a bit of a bad relation in market research. Often when you do brand tracking, historically, you're reliant on the agencies to give you those insights. You kind of have to go back to them and say, can you cut the data this way? Can you do this way? And before you know it, you might be waiting a few weeks to actually get your hands on insights. Traditionally as well, brand tracking has been a really slow and manual process. I can certainly remember brand tracking projects I've sat in that other companies have done, and it's not unusual that you might be looking at data that was captured 6 or even 9 months ago. That's kind of that retrospective, it's kind of dated, it's a bit slow, it's a bit unproductive. And a lot of brand tracking traditionally kind of is very sort of predictable and retrospective. It doesn't really let you look forward. With ActXM and new brand tracking, we're delighted to say that actually brand tracking has got a lot more benefits to it. The technology of doing research on Qualtrics platform allows you to really have a lot more control. We can build within the dashboard's ability to sort of build in filters, look at subsections of data on screen in the dashboard, rather than going back to the agency and saying, can you cut the data this way? Can you do that? I'm sure any of you in the Qualtrics ecosystem know as well, there's a lot of advancements from Qualtrics as well. We're already seeing AI technology and appearing in this sort of in dashboards, CX dashboards. You're able to interrogate dashboards for information. That's inevitably going to be extended into the brand world too, and it won't be long before you should be able to have that same sort of AI functionality in a brand environment. There's also things like Manager Assist that Qualtrics talk about too, where you can actually use the AI to design emails, to share information across contacts and users and that type of thing. So there's a whole bunch of sort of innovations and future sort of abilities, not just the ones that are currently available to get the most out of brand tracking. You can access your data more quickly as well via dashboards. The data can, I'm not going to say instantaneously be imported in, but certainly very quickly be imported into your dashboards. And with some of the analysis, as I'll show you in a few moments, you've actually got that predictive capability too, where you can actually look at the information you're gathering and be able to make projections that if we increase this, what might this do for consideration moving forward? I'll also talk a little bit about, whilst we're talking about brand tracking here, there is that ability too that we can now look to align our brand tracking metrics with other experience management metrics we have in place, such as CX programs and EX programs. And I'll finish off by talking a little bit about that. So great people and great technology leads to great brand tracking. And there's kind of 3 broad steps to the process, which I think are worth thinking about. Our targets, who are we actually speaking to in the research and why? The survey design itself, and of course, our deliverables. Now, These all might seem really sort of obvious and pretty straightforward, right? But actually, in reality, it's amazing how many people or how many companies can get these very basic, what seem like very basic things wrong. So let me share with you just our thinking about how to approach these types of things. First of all, it's very important to think about our targets and, whose views do you want to collect? I've done a lot of work with startups and has worked with Swinburne Uni with startups and was there to talk about the value of research. Quite often I'd have some startups come to me and say, oh, we've done so much market research. And you talk about, oh, okay, what have you done and who have you interviewed? And you kind of realize that they're getting the reviews from completely the wrong people. And whilst it's not everyone's point of view, I'm a very strong advocate that not all views are worthwhile. It's absolutely essential when you're doing brand tracking research that you make sure you get the views from the right sorts of people. You want to get people who are engaged with the category. If I've got a product, why would I really care about people who don't buy my product or aren't even ever going to buy my product? You've got to really look to align yourself and those people who can offer you sort of appropriate value or some potential down the line to move forward. You've got to think about your sample size. Now, look, typically brand tracking can be anything from 100 to about 1,000 people. It really comes down to how many subsections and how nuanced your market is. Typically, as a rule of thumb, you should look at the people you want to speak to. And if you want to view from males or if you want to view from a particular age group, you should always kind of assume that you'd have at least 50 people in that group. Now, some people say 30, but generally I find 50 gives you a little bit of a more robust, reliable point of view. In saying that, rare is the time when I've really seen it necessary to go over 1,000 responses in a brand tracking survey. Sometimes if you get a very complex market, bigger numbers are necessary, but generally 1,000 will give you a very strong read and tends to sort of be more acceptable in terms of budgets. Other considerations in collecting views, definitely think about location. Anyone who's done research in Japan and America will know that there are very different views culturally. Japanese people are very respectful and tend not to want to criticize. American people are at the other end of the spectrum and are very happy to pile in and lend individual views. Similarly, in Australia, certain markets, if you're ever doing research in beer and sport, you can guess where my interests in life are. You'd see the differences between Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland just in those territories alone. Sample boosts, you also got to be pragmatic in terms of, just how accessible and how available are individual people for this survey. I used to sit and take calls from overseas agencies who would often ask me, could you get me interviews with 500 CFOs and large billion-dollar businesses in Australia or pediatric sort of oncologists? Of course you can't because they don't exist. You've got to think about sensibly how many people are out there for you to target and cut your cloth accordingly. Similarly, there might be areas that are especially important to you. We've recently spoken to a client who has taken over a business in a certain part of Australia. So it makes sense for us to make sure that we overweight responses in this particular area just to see how the sample works out and make sure we get an informed view as required. What's really important is that there are panels out there who can really help you just make the best decisions. And when you work with us, we're able to point you in the right direction or even manage the full fieldwork process yourself to make sure that you get the best outcomes from the research. The research framework or survey is also very important. Now, there's a fairly standard way of approaching surveys, and typically you might start with screening questions to identify the right people. You then move on to brand health measures, the funnel that I've talked about earlier. Category drivers, what makes people do what they do in individual markets, what's important in choosing a brand. Attitudes and perceptions, pinning sort of comments to individual brands as you go on. You might hopefully have a flex section just to add those extra value add things. And then you finish with classification, which will help you direct and work out who you should be targeting moving forward. That's a very standard way of approaching research, and it's absolutely the right way to approach research. I don't think there's a lot of kudos in mixing up the order because frankly, there's very proven scientific reasons why you should kind of design brand tracking in that way. For me, the key things when it comes to survey design is twofold. Firstly, never be sort of scared to look at previous surveys for a number of reasons. They can show you kind of what companies have done historically, what's worked, so you can build traction for your new survey by being able to compare it to old metrics, but also more importantly, can tell you what hasn't worked as well, so you can make sure you can avoid making mistakes that people might have seen before. The other really important element of research survey design is actually collaboration with stakeholders. And by that, make sure you ask not just the marketeers or brand people, but other relevant people in the organization what they want from the brand research. And that's important for two levels. One, it allows you to align the survey to the business and the needs that they actually have in place to make sure you deliver best value. But secondly, it generates buy-in from stakeholders. And that can be especially important, especially if you're in the unlucky situation where you do some tracking research and the findings aren't especially positive. Going to a room of people that you haven't collaborated with and spoken to and sharing bad news is an awful lot harder than if you've actually spoken to people and got them on side and they understand the research, they bought into the process, and they know what they're trying to achieve. The final thing about this sort of core basic to brand tracking is you've really got to think about your communication tools. We have three broad things we do. The hero of our show are the dashboards, and that's very much aligned to Qualtrics, where Qualtrics allows you to create and deliver fantastic dashboards for people. The changes in the way Qualtrics is doing things as well as with sort of breaking down in the new architecture, more and more unlimited users is going to be allowed. So it's great. We can get dashboards to hopefully more and more people and clients moving forward. Dashboards allow you to have interactive data. You can cut and paste, you can search, you can share them across the organization, you can get data into them more quickly. And it's a real kind of power sort of story behind sort of Qualtrics and how we can share insights and information with clients. And add to that the new capabilities in terms of AI and that sort of stuff. And the dashboards are only going to become more powerful and more engaging as we move forward. But also presentations and reports are a big part of our armory too. As a researcher, I love presentations. It's a great way to give an impartial read, to come and discuss research, share findings, see how your clients react. It's fantastic to do face-to-face, and thankfully that's beginning to creep in again after all these kind of pandemic sort of Zoom sessions, which we've been subjected to in the last few years. And something I think that will be not too far away as well, and this is kind of my personal view, is the importance of VR presentations in the future. I noticed at the recent Qualtrics X4 event, we all put on the headphones and we all listened to the stage presenters talk about various things. How long until we actually go and we put on a pair of goggles and then suddenly we're transported into our virtual reality world? We've got our rooms, which the data's been shown in one area. You've got color coding, you've got mnemonics, you've got signals, you've got themes, and the guy who I know really well, who's sort of leading the way in VR in Australia, he reckons that the sort of recall of information or retention of information increases 5 or 6 times by looking at data in a virtual reality world. This technology will become cheaper and more accessible, and I'm pretty sure it won't be long before the goggles have been putting on for research insights. And finally, let's not forget about reports. Very much tried and tested way to get information into the hands of our clients. Real value, we can show added thinking, we can make sure we put our own interpretation and spin on the data. As a rule, we tend to really want to kind of share sort of insights and tell a story rather than just kind of give you sort of reportage and basic numbers. But all three ways are right. I guess the important thing to say from our point of view is we don't do what we want, we do what our clients want. So please, if we ever talk to you about brand tracking research, tell us what you need and we'll do our best to deliver to you. Also worth just saying, I want to go and look at the dashboards because, as I say, they really are the hero of our sort of a brand tracking offer. Before I do that, I just want to talk about there are two kind of broad ways we deliver brand tracking. We can offer you brand on a BX platform, which is a brand tracking platform, or we can offer you brand on an existing Qualtrics CX platform. There are subtle differences in them, but basically, neither should be a sort of a clue to you actually doing effective brand tracking research. If we sort of do brand on a brand platform, you benefit in a number of ways. The platform is built for brand tracking research. The dashboards, as I'll show you, have got some wonderful advanced analysis in them. As a bit of a research geek, they're just so powerful. They allow you to do so much. And as well as kind of allowing you to sort of do better, more malleable analysis, they also include predictive capabilities. So you can really understand what the data means and where the data can take you. Also, from a sort of research provider point of view, the brand dashboards are built in a way that allow easier manipulation and access to data and more quickly, and you can build in really sort of simple filters that really allow you to access data in a more complex way. I'll talk a bit more about this as well, but if you do brand in a brand platform as well, it really opens up the door to cross-XM capabilities, which I will finish off talking about in this presentation. Slight downsides in the brand platform, well, it does cost a little bit more because you are buying a separate brand license. And similarly, if you're a kind of hands-on organization and you spend a lot of time sort of upskilling yourself in the CX world, there is a bit of a need just to upskill yourself, but it's not too big a stretch from what I see. Or you can do brand in a CX platform. The benefit there is clearly you might not need to buy a second license and you might not need to upskill yourself in technology. But certainly, as you see from what I show you, dashboarding capabilities are a bit more limited. It doesn't have the predictive capabilities of the brand platform. It does take a bit more time and it's a bit harder to get the data into the environment and sort of make it more usable. And you certainly might have more limited cross-XM capabilities. But the way we approach research is broadly the same, and brand tracking is broadly the same. but depending on the platform you use, there are differences in the outputs. So let's talk a little bit about, so just show you some of these dashboards on the brand platform. These are the basic funnel metrics, and I absolutely love these. You can see just visually how well designed they are. They're nice and clear. They show the brand funnel clearly from awareness all the way through to consideration to purchase. You can show tracking over time. You can cut and paste. You can have like your own brand information. You can align that and have beside it. You can have different competitors, or you can have a competitor funnel where you can input individual data. All sort of very powerful, very useful, and very clean and easy. Similarly, you can have more advanced sort of analysis at your fingertips on the brand dashboards as well. Now, drivers analysis and correspondence maps aren't necessarily new, but what is fantastic about them in the brand tracking area is that how quickly they can be done. With drop-down sort of filters, you can actually build a correspondence map in seconds, rather than what you need to do traditionally, which maybe go away to a statistician, run the data, and you might be saying, I want to see a correspondence map, and you might have to wait hours, if not days, to access this data. So again, the platform's designed for those core brand metrics, which we know are important, that you can really access quickly and efficiently. Also, there are the sort of elements of the dashboard as we get into now some of the really clever stuff. You'll see in the left of the screen, you actually have a predictive capability in the brand tracking dashboards, the BX platform, where you can actually look at the impact of changing individual attributes or associations with your company and understand what it might do to consideration or purchase of your products. So if you're not doing well in value and you think value is going to be the flavor of the month, you can upweight your value score, and then you can get a commensurate read on what's likely to happen to your consideration for uptake moving forward. So again, just a way of empowering you to get much more sort of value out of your brand spend. Similarly, other toys that exist in the platform, one of my favorites is a distinctive image association, which is the top right image. What this does is give you brand associations, but it normalizes for size bias. Obviously, the bigger company they are, the more likely it is that people will associate things with you. The software in the dashboard actually normalizes that bias, so we can really just look at what individual brands stand for in reality. So fantastic sort of elements, predictive capabilities, clever analysis, which really will allow you to get the best out of your brand tracking. Now let's look at dashboards on the CX platform, and we can see still good, still certainly a mile ahead of any static reporting that you might traditionally want to do, but clearly they do kind of lack the pizzazz and some of the predictive elements that the BX platform will offer. But you still have that ability to get to your data quickly, and you still have that ability to jump in, look at trend data, filter, create filters to see certain types of data in certain types of way quickly and effectively, and do a lot of the heavy lifting without being reliant on an agency partner. Similarly, you can sort of tie it to other metrics that might exist in your organization, whether it's NPS or trust. You can sort of filter in different organizations from different sources, as well as pulling in broad areas from your brand tracker itself. And you can get sort of very powerful stories moving forward. So again, the key thing for us is to really try and work out how we get the insights into your organization quickly in a way that's usable. As a researcher, I know how much research doesn't get used or gets ignored because it's not conveyed in a meaningful way. I remember once being in an insurance company in Scotland. I'd just finished a study I'd done for someone, and I actually found a report in their library of exactly the same research I'd just finished doing that a competitor had done like 2 years ago. Basically, they'd lost people, they'd lost this report, and they ended up spending money in a new project where they actually had all the insights they needed. So we've got to get research usable, and we've got to find a way to make it happen. So just a final couple of slides from me before we can go in and sort of see any questions that you might have. Now, the future of brand tracking. Well, we've already talked about AI. We've already talked about things like Manager Assist. Something else that's quite cool out there, which I kind of skipped over earlier, is the importance of what we're calling synthetic data. This is where, for those very hard to reach audiences, there are now people using AI to generate synthetic responses. So if you've got a target that exists in very small numbers, you can take their views, you can apply AI to it, and you can suddenly get artificial views of an extra couple of hundred people. Now, there's pros and cons on that. It's still quite embryonic in how it's being designed, but it shows you where the world is going. There's so much innovation, there's so much effort going into research, and as technology accelerates, then the things we'll be able to do in brand tracking will keep up and increase accordingly. I do, though, want to just quickly talk to you about CrossXM, which is something that Qualtrics offers, which I think is a really exciting development for brand tracking and those of you with CX programs or EX programs. Now, basically, the rationale behind sort of cross-XM is really that a lot of companies currently run their CX and BX programs separately. They might have data being captured across multiple systems, and you might even have separate teams, your CX and your brand teams, sort of managing these two individual pieces of information. The challenges with this is you're kind of facing a situation where you might not understand which promises are driving retention or loyalty for your organization, and you also don't know what actual experiences your customers have are aligning or are consistent with your brand promises. Now, clearly there's an opportunity that if you can connect your CX and your BX data, then clearly you can really underlie or sort of identify what sort of the common themes across both programs and really work out what elements could help you prioritize your focus moving forward. Now, there's three broad steps to be able to do this. The first thing is you really need to think about how you align and measure your sort of brand and your CX metrics. And we kind of like to do this as standard. If we are dealing with a client who's moving brand tracker to us and they have a CX program in place, we're very keen to look at what you're kind of doing and make sure we have these common goals and themes in place. So if cross-XM becomes an opportunity moving forward, we can be aligned and we can already accrue the data. The second step is obviously accruing the data. So as sooner we make the changes, the sooner we can get more responses in, and then we can start to sort of look at these individual relationships between your brand and your CX metrics. And then once we have enough data in play, we can then start to do the clever analysis where we can really start to do the twofold element. Firstly, we can look at any gaps that might exist between the brand promises we're making and sort of measuring the brand tracker and the actual experience that our customers are having. That is called experience alignment to make sure that we get this kind of synergy between statements. And the second element is we can then, once we understand that level of information, we can then make decisions as an organization about what our focus should be moving forward. And finally, hopefully find that kind of sweet spot of the things we can do that will have an impact both in our brand and both on our CX world as well. So absolutely lots of things we can do, lots of reasons why you should be doing brand tracking, lots of sort of basic thoughts we can help you with and you should be thinking about when designing a brand tracker. And hopefully it's about more than brand tracking in time. There's so much more we can do with this data. And as we work in the Qualtrics ecosystem, we see more and more investment and capabilities in terms of what we can achieve moving forward.